illiberal left and fake conservatives and go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer, and we have with us Delegate Matt Morgan. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
You got it. We love having Matt Morgan here with us. Folks, this podcast is called Illiberal Left and Fake Conservatives. It's actually an incredibly interesting subject matter because they are indeed connected. And we also have a pretty funny go woke or go broke. First up, the illiberal left. Chris Cuomo of CNN's Prime Time, as they call it, had Bill Maher on his program. So the program, of course, is CNN's Prime Time. And Chris Cuomo, of course, who did nothing but talk about what a wonderful job his brother did during COVID, his brother being the former governor of New York State. Chris Cuomo, of course, being the ultimate illiberal lefty, decides to bring in Bill Maher. Bill Maher, of course, is a comedian. And Bill Maher is what you would call a classic liberal in that he doesn't really think that what's happening with the Democrats, the move towards Marxism, if not being completely already in Marxism, he doesn't think that's a good idea. So we have a series of 3 clips. Matt and I are going to talk about this in a minute. First up, Maher says, I'm an old school liberal. They change, not me. We have that clip, and here it is.
Why aren't you concerned that whether it's HBO or whoever owns them in that minute, or your audience or some group comes and says, Maher said too much. He's got to go. Why aren't you afraid of that?
They do it every week. I take the show Friday.
That's called Tuesday.
Yes, exactly. A Friday night. On Saturday, some people who haven't seen the show yet say to me, how'd the show go? I always say, if I haven't been canceled today, it went fantastic. Then it was a giant success. Of course.
But you don't change.
No, they come after me every week for something. Both sides, which I think is great.
Maybe that's what saves you, that you have both sides coming after you.
And that's fairly new. Not because I changed. My politics have not changed. I'm an old school liberal. We were talking about the race issue. They changed, not me.
So an old school liberal is an individual who is not afraid of making fun of anyone, right? They're not afraid of being critical of anything. And that's what Bill Maher does in his comedy. That is true. But the only people, let's be clear, Matt, the only people that are trying to cancel Bill Maher is the left, which is what makes them illiberal.
You mean the party of tolerance is trying to cancel people? Look, when I think of old school liberals, a lot of times I think of my old high school English teacher. And this guy was a cool dude, man. He had this beard and stuff. And he probably smoked too much dope. But looking back on it, he was a classic liberal. He had a healthy distrust of government. He believed in freedom of speech. And ultimately, he loved the country. He was just happened to be wrong just about every idea. And right now, the problem is that liberals, they've always been liberals and Republicans gotten along with them. The problem right now is the liberal wing, or I guess the radical wing of the Democratic Party, has really gone totalitarian. And him saying the one thing I disagree with Bill Maher on them, it's both sides have been coming after me. I don't believe that's true. It's one side and it's his side.
Yeah, he says both sides are trying to cancel me. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with you, man.
Yeah, that was a disclaimer.
Republicans aren't trying to cancel Bill Maher because Bill Maher is probably one of the most vociferous anti-Trumper comedians that's out there, without question. And Republicans aren't trying to cancel him because Republicans are certainly willing to the extent that they listen to Bill Maher, are certainly willing to put up with that because he's also making fun of what? CRT and other cancel culture. And so we have the second clip in this series. And Maher says, you know what? For the first time ever, I have a politically mixed audience, which tells you something, right? His audience used to be just the left, the far left. Now his audience is getting a few conservatives and others in there because they're like, oh, wow, there's actually a comedian who's willing to make fun of some of the nutty things that the progressives and the Marxists are doing in the Democrat Party. We have that clip, and here it is.
I was the old, should be moving toward a colorblind society where we don't see race. That's the old way to look at it. I think that's still the good way to look at it. That's how we win. when it doesn't matter what your race is, the quality of your character, not the color of your skin. That's not wokeism. Wokeism, we have to see it everywhere all the time. That's different. I don't know if that makes it better. But I am, for the first time, when I'm on the road now, playing to very often a politically mixed audience. That never happened, ever. And I don't think it happens really hardly anywhere else in America.
So pretty incredible. You have a guy that's on the left who's a classic liberal and a comedian saying this whole critical race theory stuff. When did that start and how does that make sense if you're a liberal? Thoughts, Matt?
Well, I think many of us are raised in the words of Martin Luther King. You're supposed to judge a man by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin. And that view is actually deemed racist right now in Democratic circles. When we've talked about that, or I've talked about that.
How is that considered racist? How is that considered racist?
You got to look at their intellectual thought leaders like even Max Kennedy. That look at that and judge everything through color. And we're seeing that, really come to light. You've seen it over in Virginia. You've seen it in the school system. And like they love to frame it looking through the lenses of equity. That's how they're judging a person's ability.
So their view,
whether you're qualified for a job.
If you're a progressive and a Marxist, which the Democrats are today, what is equity in their minds? Just to clarify that for the podcast listeners.
It's equal outcome based on what you identify as your group, whether it's skin color or your sexuality. It's equal outcomes for that group.
So is
impossible.
Is it equal outcome of material items? Is that what they're really looking for? Or?
I think they're looking for equal outcome of really everything, from material items to really happiness.
Also with like Pete Buttigieg, when he and his partner were posing for a picture in the hospital and they were both sitting in the hospital bed together with their newly born twins, as if Pete Buttigieg's
gave birth.
Husband just gave birth. Basically, that's part of equity, right? That it's not fair that just women
that would be
can
called
give birth.
Health equity.
Health equity. Okay.
Yeah.
So health equity is when some guy who's a dude can get pregnant and then give birth and then pretend like he actually went through 6 hours of labor and gave birth. Or a lesbian can somehow conceive without actually having, intercourse with a man.
Social equity, where you're not constrained by the limits of your gender.
I see.
Or your skin color. And this is what they believe.
But they also believe in economic equity as well, right? Because once
they've always believed in redistribution.
Yes, which is, how is it possible that this guy, or how is it fair that this guy or this woman worked 7 days a week and now they have this really nice 4-bedroom home with 2.5 baths and 2-car garage on an acre of land. But I have been on welfare and choose not to apply myself for whatever reason. How's that fair? That I haven't gotten what they have. Doesn't matter how much work I put into it. I should have the same thing.
Well, you shouldn't complain about the outcome that you didn't get from the work that you didn't do. I mean, that's common sense there. But I think it's even more than that where they go down to this. I think what Bill Maher is really talking about is, Republicans do tend to have more friends or that are on the left or Democrats. I know I have a lot of Democratic friends. And I'm starting to see a situation in the society where Democrats are actually pushing people away. If you're a Trump supporter, if you're a conservative, like, ooh, we're going to push you away. And I think that's what he's talking about, his audience being, more inclusive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you're a DeSantis supporter, the Democrats,
DeSantis.
They fear DeSantis actually more than they fear anyone. They fear Trump, of course, but they most definitely fear DeSantis because of DeSantis's capability of articulating the policy preferences, which are the same policy preferences of Trump, except that DeSantis, of course, this is my opinion, DeSantis does a better job explaining those policy preferences. I was thinking the other day about the great philosopher John Locke, and as it relates to critical race theory, podcast listeners. So John Locke, of course, is the great philosopher of the Enlightenment.
Inspiration for the Declaration of Independence.
And most definitely an inspiration for the American Republic, without question. And John Locke wrote, among other things, that every child is born with a blank slate. Every child is born with a blank slate. The idea being that child is a tabula rasa. The child is born, they don't know anything, and they don't have any kind of biases. And so when you take that extension of the great Lockean philosophy of how we are all born not knowing anything and not having any biases, why on earth would we willingly take our child, let's say when the child is 3 years old or 4 years old, turn the child over to someone to watch the child, let's say for a few hours, who is an absolute racist and uses all of these horrible names and tries to teach the child about racism to see nothing but color? We would never let the child play in that household, ever. Yet, that same child who was born with a blank slate, we are turning over to the public school system. And the public school system is teaching that child to see only color and tribalism and hate themselves or others solely based on their identity groups. So it is so anti-enlightenment what the liberal left is doing. They are indeed illiberal when they're doing this. And it's so not John Lockean. And you have to say to yourself, why would any reasonable person with a child, once again, send their child over to Johnny Smith's house, and the child plays over with Johnny Smith's house? Your child, let's say, is 4 years old, and they're having this 2-hour play date. And you know full well that at Johnny Smith's house, they're going to be saying all these incredible things that are incredibly racist, that they believe in. Maybe they still believe in Jim Crow or whatever. You would never allow that. Yet we are turning our children over, Matt, to public school systems that are doing just that.
But one of the reasons for that is the media. They cover for these guys. But I think that, the one benefit of COVID and having kids at home, parents have started seeing what their children were learning.
Thank goodness.
And seeing that
we saw that in the Virginia race.
What makes that scatter is, shining light on it. Transparency will fix a lot of these issues. And I think parents are sitting there looking like, well, that's you're teaching our kids to be racist. You're teaching people to judge other people based on skin color, which is at the root of CRT. And really, it's not worth a dime of taxpayer money to teach children to hate each other.
Yeah, Matt, imagine picking up your second grader, and you go to you pick up your second grader and they go for the conference with the teacher in second grade. And you say to the teacher, "Hey, Mrs. Smith, my kid wasn't a racist until he took your class. Congratulations. Great job." Hey, that's what the left is doing now. They're like congratulating the teachers for doing that.
Well, I mean, he's obviously in second grade. He's going to grow up to be an oppressor.
And to be fair to the podcast listeners and to the teaching community, there are many, many teachers who think this is absurd, this being CRT and teaching. Unfortunately, most teachers who are against CRT and against this kind of political philosophy and against this indoctrination aren't speaking up because they're terrified of losing their jobs or their pensions.
Well, they're terrified for being singled out. And let's face it, I mean, what normally protects teachers in those industries are their unions, right? I mean, that's why they're there. And the unions came out and defended CRT. I mean, and matter of fact, that not only did they defend critical race theory, but they're trying to group capitalism into that as one of the oppressive systems that keep people down. So it's been really troublesome to see this. Let's face it, we both known this was coming for some years, how situations are framed. But I'm glad it's coming to light, and I'm really glad to see people saying, you know what, I wasn't raised like this. This is not how we were raised. This is not America. America represents joy and optimism from around the world, where you come here and it doesn't make a difference of your race. It doesn't make a difference of your religion. It doesn't make a difference who your mommy and daddy were, that you can work hard and get ahead.
But that vision turns people into conservatives because then they believe in individualism and the ability to get up and out. Whereas with the illiberal left, they are now saying that term getting up and out and working hard to get ahead, they are now saying that those terms, those uniquely American terms, are themselves racist.
Yes, they're racist. And their solution is because they're racist, give us more power.
Right.
I mean, every solution they have, from climate change to many of the things you're seeing in the CRT, it's always to enable them to have more power to be able to control your life and enrich themselves.
Exactly. So next up, we have the third clip in this series of the illiberal left with Bill Maher. Remember, this is Chris Cuomo, primetime, asking Bill Maher these questions. And Bill Maher is like talking about how far crazy nutso the illiberal left has gotten. Folks, while we have talked about this before on Mark and the Millennials, which you don't hear very often on any podcast, is the fact that we have this political comedian, Bill Maher, who's willing to actually call out the illiberal left for doing the craziest of cancels you can possibly imagine. You know, the old cancel culture. I mean, who cancels Lincoln, for example? Well, the illiberal left. We had that clip, and here it is.
Why? Do you think there's an increasing separation
I think
between
there are-
real people and the people who are in power over them?
I think there's a lot of old school liberals like me who don't like what's going on the far of the left. I keep saying, when you're doing something that sounds like a headline in The Onion, that's when you've gone too far. You know, Land of Lincoln cancels Lincoln. That really happened. You know, they tore down Lincoln.
Yeah.
So Lincoln isn't good enough for them. Seattle, the city council voted to decriminalize crime. This is an Onion headline. You know, I saw one very recently. Maybe babies should vote. That's what I mean about the party of no common sense.
New York City, they took down Thomas Jefferson from in front of City Hall.
Yeah. You know, ACLU official advocates banning a book. These are Onion headlines.
It's almost like George Carlin, you know, the famous comedian George Carlin, you know, who would make fun of all different kinds of professions. You know, it's like good humor man slays 10, pen pal stabs pal with pen, pediatrician dies of childhood disease, and Jacques Cousteau drowns in bathtub accident. I mean, that was famous. That was a famous line from George Carlin. Bill Maher is saying the same thing about the cancel culture. You know what the difference is? Difference is they actually are serious.
Oh, they're absolutely serious about this. You know, the thing that struck me in that whole thing is they'll normally run back when they talk about Jefferson or Washington or one of the founding fathers. Is it's like, well, they committed the original sin of slavery. They owned slaves. What gets me is like Lincoln's on the chopping block right now. And I think that's completely political. I mean, last time I checked, Republican Abraham Lincoln defeated Democrat Jefferson Davis for the Confederacy. So, I mean, now even Lincoln's on the chopping block. Look, I think the point of the left here is not to really be accurate with history. Their point is they're just really like upset people to start with.
They want to destroy the country.
They're unhappy, and they really don't care what the current system is replaced with.
Chris Cuomo,
they
too.
just want to destroy the current system. And I love that Chris Cuomo is sitting here like all calm.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
he's like one of the biggest propagators of this.
Yes, he is. Chris Cuomo is he is no doubt one of the primary individuals, as you just said, responsible for the craziness that's happening in America today, except that here he is sitting down very calmly asking questions to Bill Maher. He never asks questions in a calm manner like that. It's always stoking division. And here he is talking to Maher, and Maher's just like, look, I mean, I just think what's happening on the left is crazy. And, you know, you got Chris Cuomo saying, well, yeah, you're right. It's just, it's not right. It's not.
It's not right. I just contributed to this 5 nights a week.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And so, speaking of the media podcast listeners and how illiberal they are, and how the left is so illiberal, the left stokes hatred of Rittenhouse. So, as you know, Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of all charges, as he should have been, because he was defending himself. You're allowed to defend yourself in America. It's called the Second Amendment. And the media has gone crazy. The illiberal media has gone crazy. So meanwhile, and I have an interesting take on this, because I'm sure you're thinking that we're going to just take you in one linear direction, podcast listeners, and the direction is, well, the media is so awful. Yeah, we're going to take you in that direction when it comes to Kyle Rittenhouse. But there's something else. There are consequences of a media an illiberal left that is saying that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist because he defended himself. And you know what that results in? It results in what we just saw, in my opinion, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where there was a Christmas parade, and a gentleman who is now in custody and appears to be the individual because they have his car, ran over a bunch of people and killed them and injured many others. And the gentleman happens to be black. And I ask you, podcast listeners, how does an individual get radicalized? How does an individual? Well, you tell the individual that the sole root of all of their sadness in their life, the sole root of why they aren't doing well, is because of white supremacists like Kyle Rittenhouse. Thus, you have this Waukesha, Wisconsin Christmas parade where an individual, this particular individual, goes in, and I grant you it's alleged, but let's face it, people are dead and people are injured. It's not alleged. And it's alleged that he did it. Okay, we have to say that. He hasn't been tried and convicted, so we have to be careful. He's been charged, I'm sure, is about to be charged. They have a person of interest and they have his car.
Let's talk about what.
It's like O.J. Simpson, right? But that's a whole different thing.
Why was he out of jail in the first place?
Right. Yes. And where I'm taking us here, Matt, where I'm taking this podcast right now is that the illiberal left has gotten so crazy with their language that you can't even have the right of a trial and be acquitted in America without the left still stoking up this division, causing what really is a terrorist incident by this gentleman in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I mean, what we should be saying right now is that this is domestic terrorism that this guy is engaged in. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think the left is crazy. And this is what they're now that we're starting to cross into what they call social justice. You know, people have been discriminated, and their only solution to fix past discrimination is future discrimination.
Yes.
And that's where we're at. The events of yesterday where the guys just drove through the car, what a bunch of disturbing video.
Incredible.
That was.
You know,
we're not going to play it because, you know.
I couldn't even watch it.
Yeah, it was horrible. And imagine yourself sitting there, and my daughter participates. She's in the band. She does a lot of that stuff. And you're sitting there wondering, it's like, man, this car just drove through a crowd in what looks like to, you know, we don't know the details of the case, but we do know this guy had a long rap sheet. Matter of fact, he was a rapper. Yeah, they released a video showing him that he was actually rapping in front of the car that he used to drive through the crowd. Mm-hmm. He was convicted for sexual assault, which kind of leads me to
with a minor.
Yeah.
So
much like Joseph Rosenbaum in the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
That's exactly right. That happened in Nevada. Apparently, he had a number of cases of engaging in sex with minors in Nevada and was convicted there. So yeah, this guy's a real winner.
I mean, right. I mean, at this point, he could end up with a Disney special. Nothing would surprise me.
Or a teaching gig at a major university.
Yeah, a teaching gig in a major university.
Right. He's a minor attracted individual.
You got to start wondering about the social justice platform is why are these people out of jail? These are not like good people. They get out of jail. They support these horrific crimes. And, you know, the first thing apparently they do once they get out is they go do more destruction.
And this goes to how the illiberal left media has stoked this anger of individuals that an individual would find it compelling to get into a car and run over innocent people in a parade, a Christmas parade. And then you have Bubba Wallace, who's a NASCAR driver, who says Rittenhouse would have gotten life if he were black. Now, you know a lot about this particular industry.
I do.
Tell me about it. And Bubba Wallace.
Well, Bubba Wallace, I mean, I'm starting to wonder if he would have a job if he was white. I mean,
is he not that good at his work?
Well, I think he's an okay driver. He's extremely marketable, and that's the reason why he's in that car. Mm-hmm. But for him to come out and make these statements, especially severely misleading statements after a jury's already issued a verdict, it's not good for the country. It's not good for the people, his followers, and it just shows you how much the media has really poisoned people like him. And I blame the media for this because they've been doing it for quite some time, Mark. I mean, you look back at Russian collusion, Hunter Biden's laptop. Heck, you can go back 10 years ago and talk about the Duke rape case.
That's true.
Where they're out to target and drive a certain narrative. And it's just really, really bad for the country. Now, we used to be able to get independent news sources. You know, social media played a real role in that. But now you have independent fact checkers and them crossing that out and different algorithms. And it's setting up a lot of confusion for people trying to get the true narratives out.
Well, it starts out with the illiberal left literally lying, not just about the Rittenhouse trial, but not even attempting to educate what appears to be a very uneducated audience that they have about the American system of you are innocent until proven guilty. And that when you have a trial by a jury of your peers and you were found innocent, by the way, not because it was a jury that was a hung jury, but a jury that unanimously found you innocent of all charges. And what the jury didn't say, because that's not their job is to say you're either innocent or guilty. What the jury didn't say, but they said at least through indirectly their actual ruling was, this guy was defending himself.
Well, it was pretty obvious when the guy was defending himself for anyone that paid attention to the trial, especially when the person he shot that lived came out there and gave testimony. He's like, well, he only pointed a gun at me after I pointed my gun at him.
Yes, yes.
So that would be the definition of self-defense.
Who amongst us, Matt, wouldn't want to defend ourselves if we ourselves or our children or family members were in the parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin? We saw this guy coming and we had the right to carry and we saw him driving and speeding up. Who among us wouldn't try to shoot at least the tire, right? To try to stop him if we...
Well, I think details are still coming out in the case. Apparently, I think police tried to stop him there's a couple bullet holes in that vehicle that they knew this was going to be a problem.
But I'm referencing a third party, like a Rittenhouse type person who just happened to be at the parade. They happened to be had concealed carry or open carry. And they legally were possessing a gun. And
I think those situations happen all the time, especially when people are having concealed carry. What stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Do you think MSNBC will talk about that?
No, because those situations happen all the time. They'll spread through right-leaning news sources, but you'll never hear it on MSNBC. And MSNBC, I mean, let's just face it, their reporting on this has been god-awful.
It's
god-awful.
The Read Out blog, which is Joy Reid, she tweets out, Kyle Rittenhouse trial was designed to protect white conservatives who kill. The shooter's homicide acquittal coddles conservatives and may lead to even more violence. So, folks, that's what MSNBC put out, one of their key anchors, Joy Reid. And then literally within days, yesterday in particular, you have this Christmas parade massacre, probably by an MSNBC viewer who's watching this stuff and is being stoked by these things. And it's short. This would be a good question by the media if they weren't so illiberal. Namely, when this guy is charged, if he is the correct person, let's face it, they have his car. Hey, sir.
The headline on MSNBC, if this guy it's another white supremacist disguised as a black person.
He's a white supremacist who killed a bunch of other white supremacists. Yeah, but
that's where they're at right
wouldn't
now.
They ask him? Wouldn't it be interesting to ask him, sir, what has radicalized you to do such a thing, and find out what he says, and you could probably match it, I'm guessing, with what you're seeing on MSNBC and CNN.
Nobody's going to talk about that because the media they're not legitimate news people. They're corrupt Democratic operatives trying to drive a narrative.
Exactly. And we're going to get to that.
You know what? A good case of that was, it wasn't that long ago that you had 3 congressmen shot up on a baseball field.
Yes.
By a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Correct.
And I don't think there was a lot of news around that at that time or what established and radicalized that man.
And this goes to, and I know Chris, our producer, has said this a few times, And that is, too many Americans are looking to the federal government to solve every problem. And you know that you feel like your whole life is at stake when everybody looks to the federal government, by the way, including conservatives. And we're saying, wow, conservatives are saying, wow, government's way out of control. The federal level, we feel so connected to the outcome, to the stakes of elections at the federal level. It was never supposed to be that way. It was never supposed to be that way. And MSNBC host, she says she's disgusted by the Kenosha verdict of Kyle Rittenhouse. He's a little murderous white supremacist. So MSNBC host podcast listeners, Tiffany Cross, laid into Illinois teenager Kyle Rittenhouse, calling him a little murderous white supremacist. We actually have that clip. If you want to know, if you want to really understand why we have riots across America, why the Democrat voters are rioting, and why the Democrat voters are engaging in these horrible crimes, just watch and listen to MSNBC host Tiffany Cross. We're going to talk about what needs to be done to stop this, not to cancel MSNBC, not at all, to hold them accountable. But first, listen to this clip. We have it. Here it is.
I find these people disgusting, Ellie. I'm disgusted at what I'm seeing. It's not just this trial, it's other trials. But this in particular, the fact that white supremacists roam the halls of Congress freely and celebrate this little murderous white supremacist, and the fact that he gets to walk the streets freely, it lets you know these people have access to instituting laws. They represent the legislative branch of this country. What do we do?
Yeah, so can you believe that?
Murderous white supremacists.
It's
like there's no evidence to show that he was. This is a narrative that they built, completely fabricated.
But what if, Matt, you are an MSNBC viewer and that's all you watch? And it's hard to believe, but they have them. And wouldn't that probably radicalize you?
Yeah,
because
look at multiple college campuses at this point, where this narrative is pushed. And look, if you're a kid that age saying, man, this little radical white supremacist could come and shoot up my neighborhood.
Yes.
And people are fearful from it. And it's just irresponsible. It is irresponsible. And my question is, when is their Twitter account going to be suspended? I mean, they were on the verge of jury intimidation. They sent reporters out to follow the jurors home.
Correct. While they were being sequestered, they're following the jurors.
Yeah, I mean,
the juror bus.
At what point do they pay a price for this? And I think there's going to be a lawsuit, and I hope it's a big one.
This goes to why we're doing this segment, the illiberal left and what the media is doing. So we're going to do this segment even before the massacre in Waukesha, Wisconsin, of this Christmas parade. Now between Rittenhouse and this Christmas parade, if there can be a nexus created between that Christmas parade, this gentleman that committed this crime, and MSNBC, then we need to hit them exactly where it counts, which is in their wallet. And the difference between us on the right, conservatives, and the illiberal left is, I don't want to cancel MSNBC or CNN. I want people to see in the United States that there are consequences for stoking evil. And this is pure evil that they're doing. They're engaging in pure evil. And then there's the whole Rittenhouse verdict, right? The fact that they've said this about Rittenhouse and they've called him all these names and they've been misreporting. I can't wait, as you just said, Matt, for Rittenhouse to also sue MSNBC, CNN, and the president of the United States and go after them right where it counts.
Oh, well, Joe Biden had campaign ads on this, and they were trying to establish a false narrative, linking like anything they could to Trump, white supremacy. And because, look, this is what they have to do to win elections. They have to lie, they have to distort and distract, because it's not like they're going to run on their policies working.
Exactly.
I mean, they come out and promise you the utopia. They deliver on Baltimore. They deliver on Chicago.
Well, Joy Reid said last week, well, I guess people don't like Joe Biden anymore. That's why his polls numbers are falling, because they've already burned through their $2,000 that they got. And I'm like, well, yeah, they probably have burned through the $2,000.
But look, I mean, the repercussion is that this should go to court and this kid should win a lot of money. I mean,
By the way, would you rather have $2,000 from the federal government, or would you rather have an actual real job and a real career and a real career path?
You'd rather have a career
where you have a lifelong ability to make a living.
Right. And we use this argument during like minimum wage laws, where it's like, I don't want an extra nickel an hour. I want a career. You want a career. Opportunity.
Yes.
And it only comes from having more businesses, more opportunity.
So the Rittenhouse thing, let's go back to that, because we're on this illiberal left and the Rittenhouse thing. By the way, in the Babylon Bee podcast listeners, in the Babylon Bee, they have an article titled,
which looks like a legitimate news source at this point,
but it is not. It's It's
satire.
It's satire, but you're right. It's probably more accurate than MSNBC. It's the title of the article is Rittenhouse verdict raises concerns that it's no longer safe to beat people to death with a skateboard. So, as Americans deal with the aftermath of the Rittenhouse verdict, many are being forced to come to terms with the fact that it's no longer safe to beat people to death with a skateboard in America. Quote, I'm devastated. I'm terrified. I don't even recognize my own country anymore, said local concerned citizen Gail Pittlesnoot. How have we gotten to the point in our nation where people can no longer beat someone with a skateboard or kick someone in the face or threaten to kill them without the risk of being shot? It's just horrible. The American Society of Communist Skateboard Murderers, ASCSM, reports that more and more of their members are dropping out, no longer confident that they can go out at night, burn down cities, and bash in people's skulls with skateboards unmolested. Quote, this sets a dangerous precedent, said Pittlesnoot. It could be that in a very short time, we will no longer see gangs of marauding skateboard murderers, arsonists roaming our streets at night, and that's a very sad thought. Experts are recommending that in the near future, for everyone's safety, people who own skateboards just ride them for fun instead of beating people with them. Way to go, Babylon Bee.
And I thought all this time we lived in a free country. We need to really look at this through the lens of skateboard equity.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you didn't have, the ability to go out and get a firearm, maybe,
Could you skateboard? I could never skateboard.
I tried
skateboard.
it. I grew up on a farm. There wasn't a lot of places to skateboard.
I tried.
On the farm.
I mean, the skateboard would just completely flip right out from under my feet, and you'd fall.
It would roll away.
One fall on your hip, or on your hips, or on your butt on asphalt or concrete. You're like, yeah, this isn't fun.
Well, it's interesting. There was a person actually killed out in California the day before this verdict came out on Wednesday when he was hit in the head with a skateboard. And
was it intentionally? Someone hit him?
Yeah, it was a
so he was murdered.
Commission a crime. Somebody was murdered with a skateboard.
Oh my God!
And
it's terrible.
I remember tweeting it out because I was just, 2 days before I was told by the prosecutors that, that wasn't a thing. Apparently it was a thing.
Yeah, apparently you can actually die when someone hits you over the head. Look, you can die from it because the skateboard has to be strong enough wood to hold someone that's a couple hundred pounds. So it's really solid, inch thick wood.
There's a lot of things that can be used as a weapon that weren't intended to be a weapon.
Right.
We got to get back to use of the tent, and that's up to the individual. But it still doesn't, it's unbelievable that you have news organizations that claim to be news organizations like MSNBC out there propagating this. These
and that's
lies.
all they do. And that's why we call them the illiberal left. But guess what, Matt? We also have fake conservatives. That's the name of this podcast, the illiberal left and fake conservatives. So podcast listeners, fake conservatives Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes resigned from Fox News, protesting, quote, irresponsible voices like Tucker Carlson. So this is on CNN, but this is indeed a thing. These two individuals are longtime so-called conservative pundits that are on Fox News, but they also write. They write regular columns. So every month or so, this is in CNN. While conversing with sources at Fox News, I expressed surprise that Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes are still employed by the network. After all, the two men are reality-based conservative thinkers who refuse to capitulate to Donald Trump. Unfortunately, Fox viewers rarely get to hear from them. They are booked by the network's producers so rarely that their contracts could be likened to golden handcuffs. They are now ditching the cuffs. Hayes and Goldberg announced Sunday night that they have resigned from Fox News. The pair wrote in a blog post for The Dispatch that online home that Tucker Carlson's Patriot Purge propaganda film was the last straw. So these two individuals don't like the Tucker Carlson special titled Patriot Purge, which talks about the individuals who have been arrested by the federal government for entering the United States Capitol. They have been in solitary confinement for almost a year. And it's like a Marxist country, right? Should they have broken into the Capitol? No. Should they have been charged with breaking and entering? Of course. But put in solitary confinement by the FBI and God knows who else. And so these two individuals, Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes, are like, well, Tucker Carlson, that's just like the last straw. Well, here's the thing, podcast listeners. They're jealous of Tucker Carlson.
They are.
They are so jealous of Carlson's success and the fact that Carlson is the only person on TV, and doesn't have anything to do with Fox News, any person on TV who's willing to literally discuss anything and go after Republicans and go after Democrats.
Right. And that's the reason why Tucker Carlson is trusted and has a huge, huge audience. Now, these two don't have the same skill set. Tucker Carlson don't have the same beliefs, but they could sell out and say, well, maybe I'll end up like Joe Scarborough or Nicole Wallace. Maybe I can be like, I could be the next Michael Steele. And they could absolutely sell out and do that. And that happens a lot, unfortunately, on the right, where people feel more comfortable cutting on themselves than they actually do, sticking up for their beliefs and principles. And the left never does that. The left, they will fall on their sword, driving a narrative. We just saw that in the Build Back Better vote, where the moderates were like, yeah, sure,
and
all about it.
We call it Build Back Broke.
Well, Build Back BBBS. That's right. Is what it should stand for. But again, they will never come out and talk about their activists or coming out against their party. Where Republicans, they stray off the wagon all the time because I just don't think they have a fundamental belief system. You know what?
January 6th, podcast listeners, the Democrats call it the insurrection. All right. But there's this thing in America, and it is the most fundamental foundational principle, and that is that we have due process. And how can you have due process when you are a political prisoner in prison for a year, and you are almost a year, and you are in solitary confinement, and your relatives can't reach you or talk to you or find out the conditions that you're being held in, and you haven't been necessarily charged with a specific crime, and what the heck is going on? And you got Stephen Hayes talking about this, saying, well, Tucker Carlson should never have done that, because due process doesn't count. And Jonah Goldberg saying the same thing. Due process doesn't matter for the people who broke into the Capitol. Really? It matters for everyone.
It matters for everyone because we hold ourselves at a higher standard. I would tell you that it was a mostly peaceful insurrection.
Mostly peaceful, yes.
It was mostly peaceful. It was the first insurrection. One thing I don't get with this, with the Democratic talking points on that day, because I'm not going to condone it. I mean, it was a bad look. It should have never happened.
Well, Chucky Schumer called it an erection. So he did in that one clip.
Well, I mean, you got to
on the floor of the Senate
say that. I mean, what do we spend like $700 billion a year in defense spending? So we had a bunch of middle-aged white guys carrying flagpoles. They really think, who was going to be president that day? The guy with the horns? Was he going to be president?
Exactly. Democrats actually believe that. Yeah, they actually believe
They actually believe the guy that looked like he was on the Prancing to the Wizard of Oz was going to be president. So, look, I mean, again,
it was never going to happen.
And I think Republicans, if they're going to stand up for this, we should be standing up for due process, and everyone should be treated equally. They are American citizens. But let's get back on the topic. What role did the media play in this?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I mean, good Lord, they had the entire summer of mostly peaceful protests, conditioning people that, hey, you know what? It's okay to riot.
And this is all tied to the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, too, as far as I'm concerned, because Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes, who just resigned from Fox News, are like, well, we don't like Tucker Carlson's special called Patriot Purge because he's looking at this in an objective way, and that's not the way you're supposed to look at it. Meanwhile, we have the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, And the same like group of fake conservatives and illiberal media outlets are calling Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist as well. But at least Kyle Rittenhouse had his day in court and he had due process. These individuals.
No, they haven't had due process.
No.
They haven't been looked at. It's just interesting. Tucker Carlson goes ahead and does a story, and that might be his slant. I mean, he does tend to report news, further on the right.
For sure, yes.
And people know that, and they know that about him, and he doesn't hide it at all. That is his perspective, and that's a perspective of many on the right. Now, once again, the party of tolerance is telling us you can't have another perspective on this. You have to believe what they're telling you.
Well, remember who's saying
anybody
it.
else should be canceled.
It's Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes, so-called pundits who are right of center. And this is why we're talking about fake conservatives, because we also have Chris Christie, who of all places went on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. And Trevor Noah, of course, probably the most anti-Republican, anti-conservative guy out there, or at least certainly one of them in the mainstream media, considers himself to be a comedian. And what the heck is it? He's not a comedian. He's not funny at all. But if he made fun of both sides, he probably would be funny. But where does Chris Christie go? He goes on the Trevor Noah show. And the former New Jersey governor, Chris Christie, here's what they said in the Trevor Noah show. And Republican Rescue author, so Chris Christie, wrote a book called Republican Rescue, Matt, discusses why his party needs to return to the truth. So again, New Jersey governor Chris Christie wrote a book called Republican Rescue, and he discusses with Trevor Noah why his party needs to return to the truth. And Christie shares why he's uncomfortable running against Donald Trump and breaks down the ways he thinks President Biden is failing. So this actually, to me, sounds a lot like, the Larry Hogan, Chris Christie model, which is, I really don't want to make any enemies. I mean, all of my friends are in the media. It doesn't matter who they are. I'm going to go talk to Trevor Noah and MSNBC News. And he's basically not a conservative. And he's basically saying, well, in the Republican Party, we need to only look forward. We can't look back and say what went wrong with the 2020 election. And if there was any kind of ballot harvesting and cheating, we can't talk about that, right? We can't even try to correct any laws in the country to try to make sure that we have more transparency and more fairness in elections. We can't do any of that stuff. We can't even talk about it, according to Chris Christie. You know what? I'm so sick, Matt, of these fake Republicans, fake conservatives.
Well, you're sick of them because you know so many of them.
So many in the Maryland legislature, yes.
Well, and it's true. I mean, when it comes down to it, you can see it. I mean, a lot of them talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk. They won't come out there. They're very proficient with talking about taxes and the marginal tax rate, but they won't dive into deeper issues. And Mark, I saw this firsthand played out. I went down to Georgia and actually went campaigning on the ground down there
for the 2 U.S. senators that were running for re-election
in
last
January.
year.
Because we're over in the East Coast and Maryland. There's not a lot of national politics. There's a lot of national politics, but not competitive national races in this state. And I wanted to go down and get the experience I wanted to see what was going on down there firsthand, and took a trip down there. And I remember the responses of Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. And on one side, they were being called white supremacists. They were just being like tore apart by the media.
Of course.
And then they would come out and the Republican candidates would come out and talk about the marginal tax rate.
Which, of course, most people don't even know what that means.
Yeah, they were talking about marginal corporate taxes. And it was just really, really telling where one side was being so mean and wouldn't act, and like Republicans, these fake conservatives wouldn't come out and actually talk about the real issues.
And they wouldn't fight.
Right. And they wouldn't fight
on those
And we
issues.
just went through this whole campaign over in Virginia.
Especially,
where Youngkin was losing quite a bit until he started diving into some of the culture war problems.
And he won because of it. There's no doubt about it. He won because of those cultural war
and
problems.
Look, this
like
is a big
choice.
deal. I remember, I think it was Red State earlier in the year, they had some poll. And came out, and I remember reading it, that 79% of conservatives are just not really comfortable talking about like critical race theory and then breaching that subject. And you see it all the time with establishment
They're
Republican.
terrified.
Yeah, they'll come out and talk about taxes, and they'll talk about crime.
So Matt,
but they won't talk about the issues that people actually care about. And the left uses that. They know that, and they beat you over the head with it to win.
No, you're right on. You're right on. And I just wanted to get to why fake conservatives exist, because I believe that many Republicans get elected and they truly do believe in their conservatism and their Republican credentials. Okay. They believe in many of the core issues, such as school choice, such as individualism, such as the American ideal of working hard and getting ahead. But once they get into office, so many of them want to be liked by the media and be liked by their colleagues. And Governor DeSantis spoke to Ben Shapiro about this very issue. We have 2 clips on this podcast, listeners. First up, here's Governor DeSantis of the great state of Florida talking about how corporate media has killed journalism. He says they're illiberal and they don't seek the truth. They're devoid of facts. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, I think it's just a matter of just understanding kind of what time it is. Now, if this was a media that was dedicated to factual reporting, gathering facts, putting it out, then, you may want to behave a little bit differently. But in fact, I mean, they're highly partisan. And not only are they highly partisan, they really are detached from reality and from facts at this point. Their main goal is to pursue their narratives. And so if you have facts that undercut their narratives, they are either going to ignore those facts or actively try to smother those facts. And so that's just where we're at. And so these corporate outlets, I think in terms of what they've done to their reputations with the Russia collusion report, I mean, they were manufacturing that whole story. They gave each other Pulitzer Prizes for reporting on a false conspiracy theory.
So, can you imagine? You're so caught up in your journalistic excellence that you write a bunch of fake stories and then you win a Pulitzer Prize on something that was. So then we have this second clip, and this is what we're going to really discuss, Matt, because it goes to fake conservatives, how they want to be liked. And DeSantis, in the same interview with Ben Shapiro, says, don't try to get the media to like you. And we're going to do an extension of that, of don't try to get the media and Democrats to like you, because if they like you, it probably means you aren't doing a very good job. We have that clip, and here it is.
And so, if you had asked me 10 years ago about the media, I wouldn't have said they were our friend, but I'd say, they have a liberal bias. You got to be careful of that. But now you just got to understand those corporate outlets are so untethered from the truth. They are so highly partisan that's the way you have to treat them. And so when they're trying to pursue narratives, I don't let them get away with it. If they're trying to just get information to try to do a hit piece, I don't let them get away with it. And the thing is when you have the facts on your side, it's very difficult for them, because a lot of them, all they do is recycle whatever the narrative du jour of the day is. But I would say Republicans have to understand, don't try to get these people to like you, okay? That's not what they're going to do. You got to understand what their role is.
So podcast listeners, I have to say this to you. One of the things I'm very proud of, it's not just that DeSantis has said this publicly, but this is something that I have to say that I'm very proud of, that I've been saying for a long time. And that is, so many of the colleagues that I serve with and so many of the colleagues that I know, not all, but so many of them are preoccupied with getting the other side to like them. And the first thing they'll say to you is, oh, yeah, well, the Democrat on the other side of the aisle, he and I are just the best of friends. We're just really good friends. And the problem with many of these individuals, it's not that you can't be friendly, podcast listeners. It's not that you shouldn't try to create relationships with people on the other side, because you should. It's the idea that you sometimes are afraid of taking them on with respect to policy. And the idea is to win this war. The idea is not to, as far as I'm concerned, if they don't like me, I'm probably doing something right on policy, okay? Because they don't like our policies. And if they don't like our policies, based on what we're hearing in the media and based on what we hear in the legislature, Matt, do they really like you?
I think some do. And I think what's getting more screwed up as we're moving ahead here is so many don't, because they're radicalized on their side. I can tell you that our elected jobs, I mean, it's not like when I first got to the legislature, and that was only 8 years ago. So you're seeing this like divide. Part of that, what has always intrigued me is, I always say that I could walk into a room with just about anyone, delegate or Democratic colleagues, and you could work a deal out if it was just me and them in the room. The problem is they leave the room and now they're accountable to their activists that put them there. And then, the deal's off so many times.
Even if it makes sense.
Even if it makes sense.
Correct.
Now, Republicans and fake conservatives, they have an issue where they think they need to bow down because I got to get stuff. I got to get my bill, I
got to pass my bill.
I got to pass my bill. I can't have anybody.
I have to cut a deal.
Yeah, I have to cut a deal. When you're sitting there looking at it, it's like, well, if the bill was so good and it would stand on its own merit, why would you have to cut a deal? It's about doing right, what's right, not about cutting a deal. And I think that's where a lot of Republicans get screwed up. I would also say constituents that elect these guys. The one thing I noticed different on the Democrat side versus Republicans is Republicans will elect a guy that comes out during an election that says everything right. And then they go away to do something else. That's because you elect one of you and send them off to be one of them.
Yes.
And you always hear like Republicans, like it'll be whatever.
Well,
however religious serve, they're like, well, you know what? He was such a good guy. I don't know what happened to him.
Well, herein lies one of the problems, because you brought that up, and that is if you go to your state capital and you get elected, or to the federal government, and your goal as a conservative is to see how many bills you can pass, then probably what you're going to do is you're probably not going to take on the opposition party, especially if they're in control of the chambers, because you want to get along to get your bills passed. And the thing is my concern about conservatives and how we have so many fake ones is they're not willing to take on the biggest issues of the day. And I remember one such issue is not just school choice, where even some conservatives are terrified of the teachers' unions, and they shouldn't be, but also the idea of ballot harvesting, like in our legislature, and podcast listeners in blue states across America, they're legalizing ballot harvesting and drop boxes, and of course, no voter ID. So, I brought up this issue on the House floor, and then I had like 3 of the fake conservatives come up to me afterwards and say, boy, you really like to stir it up. I'm not really sure why you had to bring that up. But I'm like, are you out of your mind? You're either for voter ID if you're not. If you don't want to battle on ballot harvesting, it means that you don't support voter ID by definition. So I'm sorry I got up and actually argued some basic principles of the American Republic, namely that you got to prove who you are when you go to vote.
Well, I think it comes down to they don't want to engage in the first place. They want everyone to like them. They don't like the conflict. I mean, for a conservative, we're good-natured people. We're raised to believe in God and that you don't talk about politics and money at the table. And for the left, they don't have any of these requirements.
No, they talk about politics at funerals.
Right. I mean, most of them practice politics for a full-time job. Some of them are even in the media. So a lot of times I feel conservatives are outgunned, but they get screwed up on they didn't send you to the state capitol to pass legislation. They didn't do that locally throughout the whole state. What they stood there, the number one job of any elected official is to defend your rights. And then you brought up the case of ballot harvesting. Well, if the elections are starting to, if there's this theory out there that there might be illegitimate because votes are coming in from other places, there may be illegitimate votes. It's up to the representative to restore that confidence. Right. And if you're not out there fighting for it, my question is, why the hell are you there?
Well, that's a great way to kind of finish the podcast, because podcast listeners, what we're talking about is the idea of fake conservatives. We first started out with the illiberal left and then fake conservatives. And too often we have people that get into office, as Matt was saying, and I've said too, where once they get there, their biggest goal is to continue to get elected and reelected and then just get along with everybody because they figure that's the best roadmap.
That's why they don't answer questions straight.
That's why they can't answer questions straight.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. And also, thank you to Matt Morgan, Delegate Matt Morgan, for joining us. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.